Hello, I hope this day finds you well. I wasn't planning on making a video about this, but I got an article in my inbox and it made me chuckle. And I find that sometimes when we get accustomed to dire news, as we are currently inundated with day in and day out, as we see our rights being decimated and seeing the vast majority of the population applauding that, it's good to have a laugh, it's good to relieve some stress, and it's good to pass that laugh on to people. So the topic of this story is the president of Tanzania, who I've never heard of before. His name is John Magufuli. And John, or Mr. Magufuli, was cautious of the CV tests. So what he did was he secretly had animals, fruits, and motor oil tested at the lab. And you'll be sad to know that the papaya, the quail, and a goat have been found positive for the CV virus. There is no mention of the motor oil, but we can assume that it tested negative. So I find it funny that this man, who did this in order to evaluate the quality of the kits, clearly there was reason to do that because they are not accurate. He sent the random samples in, gave them human names and ages, and the lab technicians were deliberately not informed about the origins of the samples. Where was it? He said, there is something happening. I said it before, we should not accept that every aid is meant to be good for this nation. So it's very interesting. Clearly he's suspicious, maybe not even of just the kids, but suspicious of what he sees as an agenda regarding this, quote, pandemic. And it's my opinion that he really has put egg on the face of a lot of officials that are screaming about testing, we need testing, especially in light of the HR 6666 that's come out recently, where they're talking about devoting $100 billion for door-to-door testing. And we already know that there's false positives on these tests. And false negatives, meaning they are completely unreliable. So this whole article here, the story at a glance, that here is the summary. All tests can potentially result in false positives and false negatives. And the second point is each test can be studied for how often we can expect false positives and false negatives. So there's no question you're going to get them. The question is, how often? Okay, what percentage would you say the tests have to be faulty before they should just be thrown in the garbage? Now remember, we are doing this for an illness that has what I've heard is 0.1% mortality rate. And even Anthony Fauci has stated that the mortality rate may be considerably less than 1%. Now this is what we are releasing inmates over, less than 1%, far less. 1/10 of 1% is what I've heard. Now, even in Ontario, it looks like they've released 1,900 inmates. Now, there's not a lot of inmates in Ontario compared to the United States. And the sad part is that there's no help on the outside, particularly for rehabilitation. So they're letting out people with clear problems, whether they're mental health issues, whether they're drug or alcohol addiction, there is no help for them. And I would say what's even more disgusting is that they're turning around and they're arresting innocent people who are going to be taking the place of those inmates. So somehow it's not safe to keep locked up people who have clearly broken the law and been found guilty, but it is somehow morally justifiable to turn around and lock up citizens who are doing nothing wrong except protesting their own government, like this woman in Sydney, Australia. And her son, as far as I'm concerned, was terrorized. And every single one of these officers needs to be held to account.
Taking a stand for her freedom, Renee L. Takriti clashes with police. My son's with me. I am not under arrest for anything. Why is she under arrest? You need to get your hands up there.
Her 4-year-old son is scared.
Why is she under arrest?
She's got a baby. You ain't touch the baby. Leave her alone.
The 36-year-old was one of about 40 people protesting against the coronavirus lockdown in the city yesterday afternoon.
Out of everybody, they grab a woman with a child. Out of everybody. This is shit.
The mother of 3 was fined for breaching social distancing and arrested for not giving police her name.
No, I'm not. I have not committed an offence. You're scaring my son.
What offence has she
Move
done?
away from me and my son. Move away.
They're ripped apart, her son kicking and screaming, held back by 2 officers.
You can hear the suffering in this child's voice. It's just a pitiful display. And there's the father, I believe. And all she was doing was standing quietly with it looks like a sandwich board sign on her and protesting. And they ripped that baby out of her arms, and that child screamed and screamed and screamed. And if anybody watching could possibly justify this behavior by these officers, what is there, 7 officers there to arrest a mother carrying her child? Shame on you. Shame on every single one of you. Remember that all of this is going on while our government officials and people in the media, seen a lot of those, they want to lecture to us about how we need to stay home and do what's right. And certainly they're the first ones to publicly shame anybody for trying to open up their business. When you got people like this disgusting mayor, Lightfoot, who went and got her hair done after chastising the people in her city, is it Chicago, and threatening them with police action were they to do the same.
Debbie, getting your roots done is not essential.
The woman who cut my hair had a mask, had gloves on. But I, as an elected official in the public face of the city, need to make sure that I am out there and visible through this crisis.
Somewhere here where she talks about why she thought it was justified that she could get her hair cut. Yeah, do as I say, it's Chicago. Do as I say, not as I do. But as an elected official in the public face of the city, I need to make sure that I am out there and visible through the crisis. People expect me to be a leader. Here it is. She says, I'm in the public every day, and candidly, my hair was not looking the way it did. I thought maybe I'd do it myself, but I knew that would be a disaster. Okay, excuse me? We see this over and over and over again with different public faces. And it's just disgusting, because until you realize and you recognize that they honestly believe they are not the same as you, they're above you. There is one rule for them and one for us. And I really firmly believe that to be true. And I've witnessed it, I've heard it, I know it to be true. And that is the whole point of collapsing this economy, burning down the old to build up the new. And that is their whole goal. Destroying the middle class and bringing about where the elite, the 1%, rule over the 99%. And we're all basically, living in pods, eating bugs, doing what we're told. And that honestly is their agenda. When your country is releasing violent inmates and instead locking up mothers and terrorizing their children, when you're doing nothing wrong but protesting the government's actions and you find yourself behind bars, you are in full-blown tyranny. All of these officers and government officials who gave their nod of consent, they've had their conscience seared with a hot iron. And as far as I'm concerned, they have an inverted moral compass. Now, I don't believe that we can save our countries anymore through the ballot box. I think it's gone too far. But if we were going to try to save Western civilization country by country, the first place we need to start is getting these unaccountable, self-righteous, bought and paid for, slimy, backroom dealing scum out of office, out of every layer of office, from municipal all the way up to federal. When we get to a point, once again, where government fears the people instead of the people fearing the government, then we will be in a position to once again have the freedom that is our birthright. And I'm talking about our inalienable rights that are no longer recognized and no longer respected. Please remember that power is never relinquished freely by those who hold it, and our public servants are currently drunk with power. And the people, in contrast, have become convinced that they need to be taken care of, coddled, protected. In a world with both a tyrannical government and a passive, complacent public, I fear the latter far more than the former, for we need the collective will of the people to push back against government overreach, and this can be achieved with even a small group of patriots. And there will always be those who love liberty and who are up to the challenge. On that note, I'm going to end with a quote by Samuel Adams. "If ye love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the emanating contest of freedom, go home from us in peace. We ask not your counsel or arms. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you. May your chains sit lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you were our countrymen." I really do appreciate the time you have spent listening to me, and I do hope to see you again on my next video. So this is Unapologetic Wasp saying God bless, take care, and stay safe.